The Billionaire's private jet, a masterpiece of luxury and engineering, had been grounded on the tarmac for 3 long hours. Mechanics in crisp uniforms had swarmed the plane like ants, pulling tools from steel cases, tapping, twisting, and recalibrating, yet each attempt ended in frustration. The billionaire, Maxwell Harrington, stood near the jet with his signature impatience. His arms crossed, his jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with disdain. For him, time was the only currency he valued more than money, and this delay was bleeding both. The crowd around him, his advisors, engineers, pilots, and even reporters who had caught wind of the spectacle, waited for the next outburst. Maxwell was known for 2 things, brilliance and brutality. His empire had been built on sharp instincts and ruthless decisions, but right now, he was cornered by something he could not command, mechanical failure. Into this tense scene walked someone no one had noticed at first. A girl, her clothes ragged and worn, her shoes nearly torn apart, her hair unkempt. She was carrying nothing but a small bag that jingled faintly with the sound of a few coins. She had been watching quietly from the far side of the airport fence, her sharp eyes following every movement of the engineers. When one of the mechanics slammed his wrench down in defeat, the girl finally stepped forward. "If you permit," she said softly, her voice cutting to the tense air like a whisper of wind before a storm, "I will fix it." Heads turned. Laughter erupted. A few gasps followed. "Who let her in here?" barked one of the guards, moving quickly toward her. "This is private property." But the girl did not flinch. She stood firm, her gaze fixed on Maxwell Harrington himself. Something in her eyes, an odd mix of humility and defiance, made him pause before dismissing her outright. Maxwell narrowed his eyes. "You?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Every expert in my employ has failed to get that engine running. And you, a homeless beggar, believe you can succeed?" The girl tilted her head, her lips curving in the faintest smile. "Belief isn't necessary," she said. "Knowledge is. And I have it." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. The mechanics scoffed, muttering under their breath. One of them called out, "She doesn't even have gloves, for heaven's sake. This is madness." But Maxwell was intrigued. He thrived on risk, and this strange interruption had cracked the monotony of his irritation. Besides, he had always believed in testing people, sometimes cruelly, to see what they were made of. He gestured toward the engine. "Very well," he said with a smirk. "Impress me. You have 10 minutes. If you fail, you'll be escorted off my property and never dare to waste my time again." The girl nodded once. Calmly, without any fanfare, she approached the massive jet. The mechanics stepped aside reluctantly, some shaking their heads, others folding their arms to watch her humiliation. As she climbed the small ladder to reach the engine's exposed components, she ran her fingers across the cold steel, not as an intruder, but as if she were greeting an old friend. Her touch was gentle, precise. She leaned in close, listening, not just to the faint clicks and groans of the machine, but to the silence between them. The crowd held its breath. Within minutes, she asked for nothing more than a small screwdriver and a length of copper wire. The mechanics exchanged bewildered glances. These were tools too simple, too crude for the complexity of a jet engine. Yet something in her certainty silenced even their ridicule. They fetched the tools reluctantly, almost resentfully, and handed them over. She worked with remarkable speed, her movement steady and deliberate. She adjusted a valve here, tightened connection there, then used the copper wire to bridge a circuit the others had overlooked entirely. Her hands, though small and rough, moved with the grace of an artist restoring a masterpiece. Maxwell watched intently, his impatience giving way to fascination. It was as though she could see what others could not, a hidden rhythm within the machine, a heartbeat waiting to be revived. Finally, after only 8 minutes, she stepped back. "Try it now," she said simply. The pilot hesitated, glancing at Maxwell for approval. With a sharp nod, Maxwell gave the order. The ignition sequence began. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a thunderous hum that shook the air. Gasps erupted around the tarmac. The mechanics who had failed stood frozen, their faces pale. The advisors whispered in shock. Even the guards who had been ready to drag her away now stared in disbelief. Maxwell Harrington's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something much rarer for him, respect. He stepped closer to the girl, studying her with a curiosity that bordered on awe. "Who are you?" he demanded. The girl met his gaze without fear. "My name is Alina," she said. "Once I had everything. Then I lost it. But I never lost my mind." A silence hung heavy in the air. Her words carried weight, a mystery begging to be unraveled. The crowd leaned in, hungry for answers. But Maxwell asked no more questions, not yet. Instead, he offered her something no one had expected, his hand. "Come with me," he said firmly. "I want to know everything." Alina looked at his hand, then at the roaring engine behind her, alive because of her touch. The air around them crackled with the energy of something extraordinary. Something about it changed the course of both their lives. And as the onlookers whispered and speculated, neither Alina nor Maxwell noticed a shadowy figure watching them from a distance. Someone who knew her past, someone who would not let her step into a new future without a fight. The shadowy figure lingered at the edge of the crowd, blending with the airport staff and bystanders, his eyes never leaving Alina. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a cap, but the way his jaw clenched betrayed the storm brewing inside him. He had known her long before the rags and the empty stares from strangers, long before she became the girl standing before a billionaire, claiming back a piece of the dignity life had stolen. Maxwell, oblivious to the stranger's scrutiny, gestured his entourage to clear a path. The swarm of reporters tried to push forward, shouting questions about the mysterious girl who had done what certified engineers could not. But his security quickly blocked them off. "Not now," Maxwell growled, his eyes fixed on Alina. There was no patience in his tone, but oddly, no scorn either. It was the voice of a man who saw an opportunity and would not allow it to slip through his fingers. Alina followed him reluctantly, her bare feet almost silent against the polished floor as they entered the lounge reserved for the billionaire's closest circle. The glass walls overlooked the runway where the jet's engine continued its steady roar, proof of her skill. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, some filled with suspicion, others with thinly veiled resentment. She didn't belong in this world, not among men in tailored suits and women in gleaming jewelry. But her presence carried a force that made them all shift uneasily. Maxwell motioned her to sit, but she remained standing. "You wanted to know who I am," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. "But first, you must understand, I did not fix your engine for you. I fixed it for the machine itself. You were about to kill it with arrogance." The bluntness of her words drew audible gasps. One advisor scoffed, shaking his head as though this was a waste of time. "Sir, she's clearly unstable," he muttered. "Whatever she did was luck, nothing more. Shall I escort her out?" But Maxwell silenced him with a single look. His eyes glittered with a dangerous curiosity, the kind he had before closing a risky deal. "No," he said firmly. "Luck doesn't wire a circuit with copper at exactly the point it was failing. Sit down." At last, Alina lowered herself into the seat across from him, though she did so with the air of someone who had nothing to prove. Maxwell leaned forward, studying her as though she were a puzzle begging to be solved. "You say you once had everything," he said. "Explain." Alina's gaze grew distant, as though her mind drifted back to a world that no longer existed. "I was raised in a house of books and machines. My father was an engineer, a brilliant one, and he taught me to listen to machines the way others listen to music. We built things together, strange and wonderful things that no one else understood. But then came the fire. It devoured our home, took him with it, and left me with nothing but my hands and what he taught me." A hush fell over the room. There was no dramatization in her words, no attempt to win sympathy, only the flat weight of truth. Maxwell tilted his head, tapping his fingers against the armrest of his chair. "And since then, you've been on the streets?" "Yes," Alina said, her voice steady. "The streets taught me the rest. Machines break, and people throw them away. But nothing is truly broken, if you can understand it. That is how I've survived, by fixing what others abandoned. Today, your jet was just another abandoned thing." Her words cut deeper than she intended, and Maxwell felt the sting of her observation. He was a man who never accepted failure, Yet this girl had implied that in his world of wealth and power, he had abandoned humility. He didn't know whether to be offended or impressed. Perhaps both. Before he could respond, a discreet buzz came from his assistant's phone. The man leaned in, whispering urgently, and Maxwell's expression darkened. Security reports a suspicious figure near the perimeter. They say he's been watching us for some time, the assistant said. Maxwell's sharp gaze flicked toward Alina. She showed no sign of surprise, but a shadow passed over her face, so fleeting most would have missed it. He caught it instantly. "You know who it is," he said quietly, more accusation than question. Alina clasped her hands together, her knuckles pale. "Yes," she admitted after a pause. "And if he's here, it means my past has finally found me." The tension in the room thickened. The advisors exchanged worried glances, already considering the risks of keeping her close. Maxwell, however, leaned back with the calm of a man accustomed to storms. "Then tell me," he said, "who hunts you, Alina?" Her lips parted, but before she could speak, the glass doors of the lounge swung open violently. The guards rushed forward, but the figure who entered carried himself with a confidence that even security hesitated to challenge. He removed his cap, revealing a face hardened by bitterness and years of chasing ghosts. "Alina," he said, his voice low and cold, "I knew you wouldn't stay hidden forever." The room froze. Maxwell's eyes darted between them, his mind calculating possibilities as quickly as numbers on a ledger. He could sense the story in the air, thick with secrets and danger, and for the first time in years, he felt a thrill that had nothing to do with business. Alina rose slowly to her feet. She did not look afraid, though her shoulders carried the invisible weight of recognition. "Elias," she whispered. The name struck the air like lightning. Some of the advisors glanced nervously at each other, as if trying to place who he was. Maxwell studied him, filing away every detail. The sharp eyes, the clenched fists, the way he seemed tethered to Alina by something stronger than hate. "You left me with nothing," Elias said, his voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "While you survived, I was the one blamed. You think you can just walk into a new life, fixing engines for billionaires, as though your sins won't follow you." Alina's jaw tightened. "I didn't leave you, Elias. The fire took everything. You know that." But Elias shook his head violently, the bitterness carved into every line of his face. "No, you ran, and I burned." Gasps rippled again. Maxwell raised his hand to silence the whispers, his eyes never leaving the confrontation. He had built empires on reading people, and he could tell one thing with certainty. The truth between these two was jagged, dangerous, and far from settled. Alina's voice grew steadier, though her eyes shimmered with pain. "I did what I had to do to survive. But if you're here to finish what the fire started, then say it plainly." The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with unsaid words and unhealed wounds. Elias stepped closer, and the guards bristled, ready to intervene, but Maxwell lifted his hand again. For some reason he could not quite explain. He wanted to see where this would lead. "You owe me more than survival," Elias hissed, his breath hot with resentment. "You owe me the truth. And tonight, I'll take it from you, whether you want to give it or not." Alina met his gaze, unflinching. "Then take it," she said softly, almost daringly. Maxwell leaned forward in his chair, the edges of his lips curving into the faintest smile. He knew now that whatever this was, whatever tangled history had come roaring back from the ashes, it was more valuable than any engine, more fascinating than any deal, and he would not let it slip away. But even as he prepared to speak, the sound of alarm suddenly pierced the air, sharp and urgent. The jet outside shuddered violently, the engine she repaired roaring louder, shaking the ground beneath their feet as though something or someone had tampered with it again. The entire room erupted into chaos. Guards sprinted. Advisors shouted. Maxwell shot to his feet, his sharp eyes turning toward Alina and Elias with suspicion. And Alina, pale but determined, whispered one word under her breath, a word Maxwell barely caught. "Sabotage." The alarm screamed like angry sirens across the airport, echoing through the glass lounge where the tension had already reached a breaking point. Red lights flashed in harsh rhythm, painting faces with urgency and fear. Outside, The Billionaire's jet trembled against the tarmac, its engine screaming louder than before, a wild beast unleashed. People rushed in every direction. Pilots barking orders, guards called to containment, engineers fumbling with tools in frantic confusion. Yet amid the chaos, three figures stood locked in a triangle of unspoken destiny: Maxwell Harrington, Alina, and Elias. Maxwell's instincts told him this was no accident. His empire had been built on suspicion, on always assuming the knife was already halfway to his back. His gaze swept over Elias first, the intruder with bitterness in his eyes, and then flicked to Alina, whose pale face betrayed not fear but grim certainty. "It wasn't supposed to do that," she said under her breath, almost to herself, though Maxwell caught every syllable. "Someone touched it after me." Elias stepped forward, his lips twisting into a bitter smile. "Machines may listen to you, Alina, but people never will. You were too busy saving yourself to see who you destroyed along the way." Her eyes flashed, pain and fire tangled in equal measure. "You think I wanted any of this? That I chose to be left with ashes? You've turned grief into hatred, Elias, and hatred into ruin." But Elias only gestured toward the shaking jet. "And now your ruin spreads others. Fitting, isn't it?" Maxwell snapped his fingers, his guard seizing Elias by the arms. Yet Elias didn't resist. His smirk remained, as though he had already won something unseen. Maxwell turned to Alina, his sharp voice cutting through the noise. "If you want me to believe a word you've said, fix it. Prove again what you are, and perhaps I'll spare you both." The room held its breath. Alina's eyes darted to the trembling jet, then to Elias, then back to Maxwell. "It's not just about fixing it," she said firmly. "Someone planted sabotage inside that engine, and if I don't act now, the explosion will tear through this entire runway." Maxwell's advisors blanched, their faces drained of color. "We should evacuate," one of them began, but Maxwell silenced it with a glare. He turned back to Alina. "Go, but if you fail this time, it's not just your life at stake." Alina didn't waste another breath. She tore off the ragged shawl from her shoulders, tossing aside as she ran toward the jet. For the first time, her frailty seemed to fall away, revealing the raw determination of someone who had lived with fire and survived its embrace. The crowd outside parted as she sprinted across the tarmac, the flashing lights painting her figure in crimson and gold. She climbed the ladder with practiced ease, her hands steady despite the deafening alarms. The roar of the engine rattled her bones, but she pressed her ear to its surface, listening deeply, as though it were whispering secrets only she could hear. Inside the lounge, Maxwell stood at the window, his fists clenched. His life had been ruled by numbers, risks, and power, but watching her, this girl from the ashes, he felt something stir that no empire could buy. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even fascination. It was faith, dangerous and fragile, but there nonetheless. Elias, still held by guards, shouted through glass, his voice muffled but urgent. "She doesn't deserve your faith. She'll betray you as she betrayed me." His words pounded the air, but Maxwell didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on Alina. She pulled open a panel, her fingers moving with desperate precision. Beneath the wires and circuits, she found it, a foreign device lodged deep inside, its red light blinking ominously. It wasn't part of the engine. It was a bomb. Her heart pounded, but her hands did not tremble. "So this is how it ends," she whispered to herself. "Not today." With one swift motion, she severed the connection, silencing the red light. The engine coughed, roared, then stabilized into a steady hum once more. The alarms cut off, leaving a stunned silence hanging in the air. Gasps erupted, cheers followed, and the crowd surged forward in awe. Engineers who had once mocked her now stared with reverence, their pride shattered. The guards released Elias, dragging him to his knees as he raged like a caged animal, but no one listened to him anymore. Maxwell exhaled, long and heavy, as if he had been holding his breath for centuries. For the first time in years, he clapped, not the cold, polite applause of a businessman, but the raw, thunderous clap of a man who had seen the impossible. "Magnificent," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Utterly magnificent." Alina climbed down from the ladder, her body weary but her spirit burning brighter than ever. When she stepped back into the lounge, the eyes that had once mocked now followed her with reverence. She was no longer the homeless girl intruding on wealth. She was something else entirely, a savior, a mystery, a legend being born before their very eyes. Maxwell stepped forward, and for the first time in his empire-building life, he extended not a hand of command but a hand of respect. "Alina," he said, his voice firm but strangely gentle, "the world has forgotten you, but I will not. From this day, you will not walk in rags again. You've given life to my machine, but more than that, you've reminded me of something I thought I'd lost, wonder." Alina looked at his hand, then into his eyes. She saw not the ruthless billionaire the world feared, but a man who, like her, had once loved creation and had buried it under power. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. But Elias's voice cut through the moment like a poisoned blade. "Do you think this changes anything? You can dress her in silk, feed her in palaces, but she will always carry the fire in her shadows. She will burn everything she touches." Maxwell turned to him, his gaze colder than ice. "No, Elias, you are wrong. She doesn't burn, she rebuilds. And you, who chose to rot in bitterness, will never understand." The guards dragged Elias away as he shouted curses, his voice fading into the distance. Silence settled again, heavy yet alive, as if the world itself paused to witness what had just unfolded. Outside, the jet stood tall, its engine humming in quiet triumph, as though it too acknowledged the hands that had saved it. Alina stood between ruin and redemption, her eyes lifted to the horizon where the first light of dawn broke through the night. In that glow, she was no longer the girl who scavenged scraps from the streets. She was something greater, forged from fire and sorrow, tempered by resilience and crowned by victory. And as Maxwell watched her, surrounded by men who once doubted but now bowed, he knew that the story of Alina was not merely hers. It was his too, for in saving his machine, she had ignited a spark in him, a reminder that empires could crumble, engines could fail, but faith, in people, in miracles, was the rarest currency of all. The crowd whispered her name as though it were sacred. Some called her the Girl of Fire, others the Whisperer of Machines. But Maxwell knew that no title could ever capture what she truly was. She was proof that even in the ashes of despair, brilliance could rise and shake the very foundations of power. And so, as the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the world shifted. A homeless girl had walked into a billionaire's fortress of pride, and with nothing but her hands, her mind, and her unyielding spirit, she had changed everything. The jet engine hummed, the empire trembled, and the legend of Alina had just begun.